Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Some Things, Some Places at Certain Times. I am doing this episode alone again, and I'm talking about Don't Worry, Darling, the new movie that came out about a week ago at the time of this podcast being uploaded, at least in the United States. Sean is not joining because it is not playing in Japan, not for quite some time. So I saw this yesterday at the time of recording this, and let's get into it. So, yeah, it's Olivia Wilde. It's not her first movie she's directed. She directed another movie that I knew about. I hadn't seen, though. I don't think it was hugely popular. But this one, of course, with the star-studded cast and much more press, I'm sure will be quite successful. And I do really like the cast. I really like Florence Pugh as an actress. I think she's great, and I've liked her for... I think the first time I saw her was probably in Outlaw King, which was also with Chris Pine. And Harry Styles, I think, is a pretty good actor for someone, who didn't get famous through acting. I think he's been doing really well in the roles that I have seen. But I also like Chris Pine and Gemma Chan especially. So, yeah, and of course Olivia Wilde does play a supporting character in the movie as well. I liked it. It wasn't the best movie ever, but I thought it was good. It wasn't scary so much. Like, I wouldn't call this a horror movie. I'd call it maybe a thriller, psychological thriller. And it is quite unsettling. A lot of it, I think it's kind of made to build up the suspense and make you kind of just question the reality of the world that they're in. Is, avoiding spoilers now, of course, but you can tell through the trailers that obviously the point is that the main character, played by Florence Pugh, her name is Alice. Feels like she's kind of stuck in this world and she doesn't know what to do, and we're not quite sure what this world exactly is that she's talking about. And it's interesting. I think you can really get into it and feel kind of what the character feels, and you're not sure whether this world is real or if it's a cult or if it's what's going on exactly. And it is a bit of a mystery to it, and it's not something that's easily or obviously given up early on in the movie. Once you find out, it is much later, and it is something that I didn't really expect, which I will get into in more detail later. But to go over things briefly, the acting I did really like. The music I thought was really good. It all fit really well. It helped kind of underscore the thriller aspects of it, the kind of creepiness of it. And the story was alright. I was a little disappointed with the ending, but I still enjoyed it. I liked going to the theater to see it. It can be a little... There's some details that I think don't match up perfectly or don't make a whole lot of sense, which I will explain in the spoiler section. But overall, I liked it. I don't think it was the best movie, not even the best movie I've seen recently, but I really liked it, and I was happy to see it. So I would give it, my first instinct now is, I'd say 7 out of 10, which to me, that's a pretty good movie. I would tell people to go see this movie, and I think most people would really enjoy it. Alright, so from now on, I will be getting into spoilers. You have been warned. If you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to do so. Once again, that's a 7 out of 10 for me. So, now talking about some spoiler details. The whole thing about it not knowing what exactly this world is, here was my first thought. The first time you saw kind of a like one of those black and white flashbacks, I thought at that moment, like, maybe this takes place in the present day or modern times, right? And they're in some kind of commune or cult settlement out in the desert. That's why they're out in the desert, so they're not connected to the outside world. And it's a bunch of people who wanted to live like this, like they were in the 1950s. So that's what I thought. I always thought from the trailer that obviously these people were living kind of disconnected from the rest of the world, and maybe it was a bit of a cult kind of thing. But from the trailer, I just assumed it all took place in the 1950s. But once we had that first flashback, or the first kind of glimpses that she gets with the dancers and stuff, where she's like, you see the glimpses of what might be another world or something, that's when I thought, okay, maybe this is something that they like programmed into her memories to make them think that this was the way they really lived. And yeah, so excuse me. So that's what I thought was going on. And of course, much later to find out I was almost right. But before I get to that, we'll just talk about some of the other stuff. I've heard some things that this main character, Chris Pine's character, was based on Jordan Peterson, who you might be familiar with, a political commentator. I don't know a whole lot about him. I know he does a lot of psychology stuff. I've heard a lot more of his political stuff than just his psychology stuff. And I've heard people say that he just is all about the politics and disguises it with psychology to make it seem more acceptable. But I've also heard he mostly just talks about psychology and people criticize it using politics. I don't really listen to him. I've seen a couple clips here and there. But maybe because I don't listen to him so much, I didn't see much of a connection. I can see how, I know he talks about men a lot. He appeals to men. The audience he appeals to seems to be like the male characters in this movie. And yeah, of course, it is 1950s, so it's a much more gender divided society. The women stay at home, they clean, they cook, and the men go to work. And that's kind of why you first don't realize that it takes place in the modern day, because it's kind of how things were in the 1950s, especially for a lot of America. And so I can see where that connection is made, but in terms of the main character, to me it seems much more like a cult leader than a political commentator. But yeah, so this, I was getting much more cult vibes from this movie. So I thought it was cool. I thought it was well done. All the suspense and all the eeriness, all the creepiness was done very well. It was just like kind of almost right from the start. There were lots of little unsettling things going on over and over, like the hollow eggshells. Alice seeing her neighbor, what was her name? The character, I will get that name for you, but her character, Margaret. Yes, the one who first went crazy, or so they say. The one who first got taken away. Like, the first time you see her holding onto the toy plane and, like, staring off into the distance, everything is just kind of steadily building up this feeling that something's wrong. And I thought it was done pretty well. And again, the music really brought me into it. It really enhanced those feelings for me. So I thought that was all quite enjoyable. And then towards the end, once you find out that, oh, this world isn't real, and she does not live in the 1950s, they live in the modern day, and you see that she was a doctor in the real world, and that Jack, her husband, lost his job, and he was just kind of listening to all these podcasts and stuff and YouTube videos, and maybe that's where you can see the most connection to like a Jordan Peterson, of this guy at home just listening to all these talks, these interviews, or you could say propaganda from a certain type of person. Although it's a bit unclear as to how he gets involved in this victory project thing. Like, what does he do? Just like, how is the guy advertising it online? Is he saying like, hey, do you want to live in a virtual world where your wife is a 1950s obedient housewife? Then send me an email and I'll send you the set it up at home kit. Because when we see that they're in like virtual reality, they are like in their beds at home. Which is, yeah, so it's a bit strange. I'm not sure exactly how that actually would have worked out. My thinking was that they were in a cult somewhere out in the desert for real, because, they're in the middle of the desert. Who would go there? And it would be hard for them to escape. And, maybe they wanted to go there at first, and maybe they really did like reprogram their memories, at least of the women who were there, so that they would stay there. But I thought it was like a physical place, and once Alice got in the car, started driving away, and, would just eventually run into regular civilization. So that's what I was thinking, and I think that would have been a bit more believable. Of course, this does kind of go into, I'd say, more fantasy, science fiction, with the whole virtual reality thing. And yeah, so that bit's a bit unclear. And Alice was a doctor. Like, even if Jack lost his job, would she really have needed to pick up extra shifts to support the two of them? Like, they were in Michigan. I don't know where exactly. I think they were supposed to be in Michigan because he had a map of Michigan on his wall. But they never explicitly state, like, what city they're in, or even if they are actually in Michigan. Maybe he just has a map of it. But, like, who would have a map of Michigan if they don't live there? But, anyway, so, like, it doesn't explicitly state where they are. From my inference, I think it's Michigan, and I don't think it's super expensive. It's not like living in New York or Los Angeles. So, like, as a doctor, and they called her doctor in the hospital, so she wasn't just, like, someone who worked there, or, like, a beginner level nurse or something. They called her doctor. We know she was a surgeon. She was giving orders to the resident, so that means she's a pretty experienced doctor at this point. So she should have had enough money to support them. I don't see, like, how does Jack get so desperate that he's willing to put them into this program, and then every day he's supposed to wake up, go out into the real world, and work just enough to afford to keep them there. Like, I think they would have been alright. So that premise, the whole reason this thing exists, doesn't really seem to make sense to me. But, so those are, like, kind of my biggest problems with it. But all the stuff that happened in the virtual reality I thought was very good. And the way that Alice and Frank communicate, the way they challenge each other, I thought was a really cool dynamic. And it's good because you get to the point where Alice is almost completely, like, I guess you'd say brainwashed again after she challenges Frank when they have dinner at their house, right? And then she gets taken away, and then she comes back, and it's kind of like, oh, she's back to how she was at the beginning. But then when Jack is singing the song that she's been humming throughout, I thought that was a very good touch. It's not like leading up to that, there's not like one moment where you realize everything isn't real, or at least that Alice doesn't realize everything isn't real. But once he hums the song and she already had that break from the virtual world, then the song brings the original memories back again. And that kind of, totally breaks the seal, so to speak, for her. And and I think it was good because they don't touch on that song very much. They just briefly mention it, but you hear it throughout the movie, so it's subtle, but you know it's there. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden this new information is presented and it changes the whole story. Like, this information's been there the whole time, and now we know what it's from. So I thought that was really good. Visually, I really liked it. I think Olivia Wilde did a good job directing it. Yeah, so it's just the bits that connected to the real world that really kind of bother me, because the rest I quite liked. I thought it was a very good thriller, very I would guess you could, I don't know if you maybe say cerebral. It's very confusing, very trippy, very unsettling, especially at the beginning before you really understand what's going on. And then, yeah, at the end, the only issue I would have is if when she was driving away, it looked like she was supposed to drive through the tunnel, but then she's going up the hill, up the mountain, and maybe the tunnel connects to the road that goes up the hill. It's a minor detail, but it just, I saw it with my dad, and he too remarked that it just seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect as to where she was driving or where she was supposed to drive and where she ended up. And then all you had to do was touch your hand to the thing to get out of it. Seems like, I don't know, the whole process of connecting to this virtual reality seems like it is the most unrealistic part of it, but it just seems a bit confusing as well. Like, the details weren't really fleshed out too much. Like, why do they lie about their job at the Victory Project? Like, why do they hide it? Couldn't they have just made something up, because none of it's real anyway? And couldn't they have just, like, made an actual workplace in this fictional reality? And there was something else. It was just on the tip of my tongue. I'll get back to it. But, oh, yeah. Gemma Chan's character, Shelley, Frank's wife, like, when she stabs him at the end, and what did she say? It was like, it's my turn now, or something like that. Was that her breaking, or like all the women waking up and trying to break out? Or was Shelley trying to take over? Like, she just stabs him and then you don't see them again, because the story isn't about them, it's about Alice. The story's about Alice. So that was a bit confusing and a bit unsatisfying. I think I would have preferred, my first thought was that this was an actual cult somewhere in the real world, modern day, just like they had it, but instead of Jack signing them up to be in a fictional reality, in a VR, he signed them up to go live in this actual cult. So that's kind of what I think would have played off better. But the rest, I think, is really good. And like I said, I give it a 7 out of 10. Maybe if I really thought about it, if the real world stuff that I thought was all the weak points were a big enough deal, I might say it's a 6 out of 10. But in general, the movie's about what they experience in the virtual reality in Victory. And I thought that was all really good. I thought it was good. I thought it was creepy. I thought it was thrilling. And yeah, to go with their job, the only other complaint I have is, like, why were there rumblings? Why did the whole thing shake? Like, they're like, oh, maybe they're testing weapons or something. Well, when we find out they go to headquarters to wake up and go out in the real world, like, what's the whole point of things shaking? Like, it has nothing really to do with anything. There's no explosions or anything going on, so that just seemed like a pointless detail. But maybe, it just serves to keep everything kind of creepy and unsettling. So yeah, overall I liked it. I give it a 7 out of 10. And yeah, I recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. I think it's good. It's enjoyable. It's not my favorite, but I enjoyed it. So that's all I have for this one. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. This will be on YouTube and Spotify. Please like, share, subscribe, and spread the word, and that can help us keep making more. Thank you.